I stood at the edge of our back deck, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, watching the lake catch the last of the October light. 40 years. That's how long Dorothy and I had been married. 40 years of Sunday morning pancakes, of her stealing the blanket every single night, of building something I genuinely believed was unbreakable. I was 63 years old, recently retired from 31 years as a civil engineer with the city of Toronto, and I thought the hardest part of my life was behind me. I was wrong. It was our neighbor's dock I was staring at when my son called. Daniel, 38 years old, sharp as a tack, works in cybersecurity up in Waterloo. He didn't say hello when I picked up. He just said, "Dad, I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you to not do anything until we've talked." I set the cold coffee down on the railing. "What is it?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment, just long enough for my chest to tighten. "It's about Mom," he said, "and Uncle Richard. Richard, my brother, 59 years old, lives 40 minutes away in Oakville, married to a woman named Susan who makes the best butter tarts in Ontario and volunteers at the food bank every second Saturday. My brother, who used to drive 4 hours to come watch Daniel's hockey games when the boy was 12. My brother, who stood beside me at my wedding and actually cried when Dorothy walked down the aisle. "Daniel," I said, very slowly, "what are you telling me?" "I've known for about 6 weeks," he said. I needed to be sure before I said anything. I needed proof. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I didn't say anything for a long time. I just stood there on that deck, watching the lake, feeling something shift inside me the way ice shifts in spring, slowly at first, and then all at once. Let me back up. Let me tell you how this actually started, because it didn't start with that phone call. It started 8 weeks earlier, on a Thursday afternoon in August, when I came home from a round of golf with my friend Barry and found Dorothy's car in the driveway at 2 in the afternoon when she'd told me she had her book club until 5. I didn't think much of it at first. Book clubs end early sometimes. But when I came through the side door into the kitchen, the house had a strange feeling to it, that particular silence that isn't really silence, the kind where you can tell someone is holding their breath somewhere. I called out her name. A beat too long before she answered. She came down the stairs with her hair slightly different than it was that morning, and she said the book club host had a migraine and sent everyone home early. She smiled when she said it. She made me a sandwich and asked about my golf game, and I sat at the kitchen island and told her about the back nine, and I almost let it go. I almost convinced myself I was being paranoid, but something stayed with me, a feeling I couldn't shake, the kind that sits at the base of your throat and won't go down no matter how many times you swallow. About a week later, I was going through our joint account online to check on a transfer I'd made to our TFSA, and I noticed a charge I didn't recognize. A hotel, the Anchorage Inn, down in Burlington. One night, $280. I sat in front of the computer for a very long time. Dorothy had told me that particular Tuesday she was driving down to visit her cousin Patricia, who'd just had knee surgery. She'd been back by dinner. I'd had no reason to question it. I didn't say anything to her. I didn't know what to say. And a part of me, the part that had been married 40 years, that had built an entire life around this woman, didn't want to know. But Daniel knew something was wrong the next time he visited. He's always been able to read me. When he was a teenager and I was worried about a project at work, he'd come and sit with me in the garage without saying anything, just keeping me company. He has that quality. He pays attention to people. He came up to visit on the long weekend in September, Labor Day, and on the Sunday evening we were sitting out on the deck, just the two of us. Dorothy had gone to bed early. And he said, "Dad, what's going on with you?" I tried to brush it off. Said I was adjusting to retirement, which wasn't entirely untrue. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "Is it Mom?" I didn't answer, but I didn't say no. He put his beer down on the railing and was quiet for a bit. Then he said, "I've noticed some things too." I wasn't sure if I should say anything. That was when I told him about the hotel charge, about the afternoon she'd come home early, about the feeling I couldn't name. Daniel went very still in the way he does when he's processing something. He's not a man who reacts quickly. He thinks. Then he said, "Give me some time. Don't confront anyone yet. Just let me look into it." I asked him what he meant by that. He said, "Dad, I work in cybersecurity. I know how to find things. Trust me." I want to be honest here. Part of me wanted to say no. Part of me wanted to say leave it alone. Let me live in the not knowing. Because at 63 years old, the not knowing is at least survivable. But I thought about that hotel. I thought about the silence in the house that Thursday afternoon, and I said, "Okay." For the next 6 weeks, Daniel quietly looked into things. He didn't tell me everything he was doing. He checked phone records. He went through things I didn't even know you could go through. He's careful and methodical, takes after me in that way, I suppose, and he didn't want to bring me anything that wasn't solid. What he found was solid. Phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts between Dorothy and Richard going back 14 months. A pattern of meetups that corresponded to the times she'd said she was visiting Patricia, or at her yoga class, or running errands. A second hotel charge I hadn't even noticed the Delta in downtown Hamilton, a Friday night in June when I'd been at a conference in Ottawa for a retired engineers association I sit on. 14 months. Our 40th anniversary was in October. We'd been planning a trip to celebrate a week in Victoria, British Columbia. Dorothy had always wanted to see the Butchart Gardens. We'd booked flights, a bed and breakfast in the Fairfield neighborhood, dinner reservations. While she was making those plans with me, she had been with my brother. When Daniel called me on that October evening and told me all of it, I sat down on the deck chair because my legs didn't feel trustworthy anymore. The lake was going dark. The neighbors were bringing their boat in for the season. Normal life happening all around me, completely indifferent. How long have you known for certain? I asked. About 6 weeks, he said. I know you're angry. I didn't tell you sooner. I needed to be thorough. I needed it to be undeniable. Does Susan know? I asked. Susan. My sister-in-law, who had no idea her husband had been doing this. Who had brought butter tarts to our house at Christmas. I don't think so, Daniel said. I closed my eyes. What do you want to do, Dad? He asked. Whatever you decide, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. That's the thing about a moment like that. Everyone always imagines they'd know exactly what they'd do. They'd confront, they'd explode, they'd walk out. But when you're actually sitting in it, when it's your 40-year marriage and your only brother and your whole retirement that you'd planned together, this woman and I had spreadsheets, for God's sake, about what we were going to do with our time, where we'd travel, how we'd structure our days, you don't explode. You go very quiet. You feel something drain out of you that you're not sure will ever come back. I need to think, I said. Take whatever time you need, Daniel said. But Dad, you deserve to know the truth. You deserve to know it a long time ago. I stayed on that deck until it was fully dark and cold. The temperature had dropped. That particular sharp drop that happens in Ontario in October, like the season, has made a decision. I went inside. Dorothy was in the living room watching television, a glass of red wine on the table beside her, the dog asleep on her feet. She looked up and smiled at me and asked if I was hungry. I said I wasn't. I went to bed and lay there in the dark for most of the night. Over the following 2 weeks, I did something I am not by nature inclined to do. I waited. I watched. I paid attention in a way I hadn't in years, and I realized with a particular kind of grief how many signals I had simply not allowed myself to see. The way she'd started keeping her phone face down, the new habit of taking calls in another room, the slight difference in how she talked about Richard, less warmth, the studied casualness of someone who has practiced it. I also called my friend Barry and told him some of it. Barry is a retired family lawyer who now does mediation. He's known me for 22 years. He didn't say anything dramatic. He just said, come have lunch, and we went to a Vietnamese place on Queen Street, and he walked me through what the next steps would look like, what I was entitled to, what the process would be. He didn't push me toward any particular decision. He just made sure I understood what my options were. What I want to tell you, what I want you to understand, is that throughout all of this, what hurt most wasn't what I'd expected. I'd expected rage. I got some of that, but mostly what I felt was a profound sense of disorientation. The feeling of standing in a room you've lived in for decades and suddenly not recognizing any of the furniture. This woman knew every version of me. She'd been there when my father died, when we lost Dorothy's mother, when I was passed over for a promotion I'd worked 5 years for, and sat at the kitchen table trying not to show how much it stung. She'd held all of that, and she'd also been doing this. I started sleeping in the guest room, telling her my back was acting up, which she accepted without question, which told me something I didn't want to know about the state of our attention to each other. 3 weeks after Daniel's phone call, I asked Dorothy if she wanted to take a drive out to see Richard and Susan on the Saturday. We hadn't seen them since the summer. She said yes, of course, perfectly naturally. Not even a flicker. We went for dinner. Susan made roast chicken and those butter tarts. Richard poured wine and talked about the renovations he was doing on his basement, and asked me how retirement was treating me. Dorothy helped Susan clear the plates. Everything looked exactly the way it always had. I watched my brother across the table all evening. I have known this man for 59 years. I remember the day he was born. I remember teaching him to skate on the rink our father flooded in the backyard every winter. I remember calling him when Daniel was born. How happy he sounded. And I sat there at his dinner table and watched him pass the butter and tell a story about his neighbor's dog, and I thought, how do you do it? How do you sit here and look me in the eye? On the drive home, Dorothy said it was a nice evening. I agreed. She said Susan seemed tired. I said she probably was. We didn't speak again until we got home. The following Monday, I called a lawyer, not Barry, because I didn't want to mix friendship and legal proceedings. A woman named Andrea, who a colleague had recommended, very experienced in family law, office on Bay Street. We had a 2-hour consultation. I walked out with a clear understanding of where I stood after 40 years of marriage, what a division of assets would look like, what I should document and preserve. The house was in both names. The cottage we'd bought in Muskoka 7 years ago was in both names. Our RRSPs, our TFSAs, our joint investment account with RBC, all of it subject to equalization. Andrea was thorough and direct and didn't offer me false comfort, which I respected. I also had a separate conversation with Daniel, a very long one, about Susan, about whether and when she should know. This was the part that kept me up most. Dorothy's affair wasn't just with some stranger, it was with the husband of a woman who had no idea her life was built on a lie. Susan deserved to know. But how do you tell someone that? How do you walk into someone's life with that kind of information? Daniel said, Dad, we'll figure that out. But Susan can't be left in the dark once everything starts moving. He was right. I decided not to confront Dorothy until I had everything in order, until the legal advice was complete, until the accounts were documented, until I had made peace with what the next chapter of my life was going to look like. I did not want to have an explosion in the kitchen. I did not want a scene. I had earned, after 40 years, the right to handle this with some dignity. It took until the first week of November. I asked Dorothy to sit down at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning. I poured us both coffee. She sat down and looked at me with that slightly wary expression that a long marriage teaches, the look that says she knew something was coming but not what. I put my phone on the table. I had the records Daniel had given me. I had the hotel charges. I had the timeline. I said, I know about you and Richard. She went very still. The color drained out of her face in a way I will not forget. I know it's been going on for 14 months, I said. I know about the inn in Burlington. I know about the Delta in Hamilton. I know about the Thursday afternoons. She didn't deny it. That was the thing that surprised me. Some part of me had expected denial, had almost braced for the exhausting performance of it. But she didn't. She closed her eyes. She put her hands flat on the table. How long have you known? She whispered. Long enough, I said. She started to cry. She said she was sorry. She said it had just happened, that she hadn't meant for it to, and I held up my hand, because I didn't need the story. I didn't need the version of events that would make it softer or more explicable. I was 63 years old. I was not going to sit at my kitchen table and listen to a narrative about how this just happened to my 40-year marriage. What I said was, you're going to need to make arrangements. I've spoken to a lawyer. I'd encourage you to do the same. She looked up at me. Her eyes were red. She said, James, I'm going to call Richard, I said. He needs to know that I know, and Susan needs to know. That's not something I'm going to negotiate on. Dorothy pressed her hands to her face. I called Richard that afternoon. He picked up on the second ring, sounding completely normal, and I said, I need you to know that I know about you and Dorothy. All of it. The silence on that phone was one of the longer silences I have ever experienced. Then he said, James, and I said, don't. Just don't. You need to figure out how to tell Susan before she hears it from someone else. You owe her that much. I hung up. Daniel drove up from Waterloo that evening. He didn't call first. Just arrived at the door with a paper bag from a Thai place I like in the city, and 2 pieces of butter, pecan pie from a bakery on the way. We sat at the kitchen table where I'd had that morning's conversation, and we ate. And we didn't talk about it right away. We talked about his job, about a project he was working on, about the Leafs, who were already testing our patience by November, as they reliably are. Then he said, How are you doing, Dad? And I mean, actually, I thought about it honestly. I feel like I've lost 2 people at once, I said. Your mother and your uncle. That's a lot to lose at the same time. He nodded. He didn't try to make it smaller. You're going to be okay, he said. I know that's not helpful right now, but you will be. I asked him how he was doing with it because this was his mother. However angry and hurt I was, she was his mother, and that was a different kind of complicated. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm angry. I'm really angry at what she did to you, but I'm also trying to hold space for the fact that she's my mom and this doesn't erase everything. I don't know how to do both of those things at the same time yet. I'm working on it. I told him he was a better man than me. He said, "You taught me how to be." That was the moment I had to look out the window for a while. In the weeks that followed, the logistics of a 40-year marriage coming apart turned out to be almost aggressively mundane. Who was going to stay in the house while things were sorted? Who would notify the accountant, whether to sell or buy out? The Muskoka cottage, which we'd both loved, that was going to be sold, which felt like losing something separate and distinct from the marriage itself, like a grief inside a grief. Susan called me 3 weeks after I'd called Richard. He had told her. She was quiet on the phone, very controlled in the way of someone who has been crying for days and has no tears left. She said she was sorry. I told her she had nothing to be sorry for. She asked if I was going to be all right. I said I thought so, eventually. She said she thought so too, eventually. We have not spoken since. I don't know what becomes of a relationship like that. A sister-in-law you've known for 30 years, whose Christmases you've sat at, whose children's graduations you've attended. I don't know where that goes. There are things about this that people don't tell you. They don't tell you about the physical dimension of it, the way betrayal sits in the body, in the chest and the shoulders, the way you wake up at 3 in the morning and your nervous system is convinced something is wrong before your brain has even caught up to the fact that, yes, something is wrong. They don't tell you about the strange administrative competence that kicks in, the way you can find yourself discussing pension division with a lawyer in a perfectly steady voice, while some other part of you is somewhere far away, standing on a deck watching a lake go dark. They don't tell you how much of your identity is quietly built on the assumption that your marriage is what you think it is. I had retired into a life I'd imagined sharing. I'd had plans, not extravagant ones a week in Victoria, walks in the Butchart Gardens, maybe a rail trip out to the Maritimes the following summer. Simple things, things I'd looked forward to without even being fully aware I was looking forward to them. I did not go to Victoria in October. I went to Daniel's instead. I stayed in his spare bedroom in Waterloo for 10 days, and he made coffee every morning, terrible coffee, something I've apparently failed to teach him properly. And we watched hockey and went for walks along the trail system near his house, and talked a lot and also didn't talk a lot, which was equally valuable. His girlfriend, a woman named Priya who teaches at the University of Waterloo, made dinner twice while I was there, and was warm and unsentimental, and treated me with exactly the right amount of normalcy, which is to say she didn't look at me like I was something broken. I found that more restorative than I expected. I'm 63 years old. I am not going to tell you that I am fine, because fine would be dishonest. There are days that are very hard. There are mornings I wake up and the specific weight of it 40 years. My brother, all of it sits on my chest before I've even stood up. I am working with a therapist now, a man named Dr. Osei with an office in Midtown Toronto, and I will admit I went in skeptical, and I go now because it helps. At 63, I am still apparently capable of being surprised by what helps. What I want to say, and this is the part I've thought about the most, is that Daniel saved me something. Not the marriage. That was already gone, had been gone in some real sense for 14 months or more. But he saved me the prolonged indignity of not knowing. He could have stayed out of it. He could have told himself it wasn't his place, that I'd figure it out eventually, that he didn't want to be the one to blow up his parents' lives. Instead, he quietly, methodically, carefully found the truth, and he handed it to me, and he stood beside me while I dealt with it. When I told him that one evening in Waterloo, bad coffee in hand, watching the first snow of November come down outside his kitchen window, he said, "You always told us that the truth mattered more than comfortable lies." I was listening. I have been a civil engineer for 31 years. I have built things that are still standing, bridges, drainage systems, road networks across this city, things that will be there long after I am not. And the thing I am most proud of building, it turns out, is a son who tells the truth even when it costs him something, even when it would have been so much easier to look away. The house is going on the market in the spring. I've been looking at condos in the Leslieville neighborhood, smaller, manageable, closer to the lake. A fresh chapter that I did not plan for and do not entirely want, but am going to build anyway, because that's what you do at 63 when the alternative is standing still. Barry and I have golf booked for next May. Daniel is coming up for the holidays. Dr. Osei says I'm making progress. Last week I stood at the window of my soon-to-be-sold house and watched the first real snow of the season cover the backyard. And I thought about something Richard used to say when we were kids, when our father would take us ice fishing out on Lake Simcoe in February. He used to say the ice was most beautiful right at the end of winter, right before it broke. That right before things fell apart was when they were truest. I thought about that for a long time. And then I went and made myself a proper cup of coffee, and I sat down, and I started making a list of what I wanted in the next place. What mattered, what I actually needed, once you cleared away everything I'd assumed would always be there. It was a shorter list than I expected, and somehow that felt like the beginning of something.